right. Well, we have a very dynamic and captivating speaker for you tonight. Just a wonderful, lovely lady. She has a wonderful story to tell. Sue Martin has written a book, Out of the Whirlpool, and it's her true story about how she lost her vision and her rehabilitation, acceptance. And Sue graduated from a Southern college, and then she earned her master's in blind rehabilitation from Western Michigan University. Yay! And Sue did really well at the university. Not only did she earn her master's, but she met her husband, Jim Martin, who's here with her as well. Yeah. Sue's working with her fourth guide dog, Kismet. And Sue worked in the blind rehabilitation for 20 years. And currently she works in the Section 508 as an analyst for the Veteran Affairs. Yeah, very busy lady. And Sue and Jim, they go mountain climbing, and they go ski cross country, and apparently they have a lot of adventures and fun. Right now, they live on 18 wooded acres in the Cumberland Plateau of Alabama. And as Sue said, with other assorted cats and dogs. And apparently, now we're going to have to talk to Jim about this, but apparently Jim still does not let Sue use a chainsaw. It is my great pleasure and to introduce to you Sue Martin. Sue?
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you. You guys are my favorite audience. I did an interview with the CBS anchor of our local affiliate in Birmingham last week. Gosh, was that just last week? And as we were driving home that afternoon, I was telling Jim about the interview. And I said, and then she asked me, what drives you? And without missing a beat, out of his mouth popped a Volkswagen Jetta. And one of our friends, the first time we saw her after she read my book, she said, can I have Jim's autograph? So I love sharing this whole thing with Jim. Let's see. I'm a Grits, a girl raised in the South.
All right.
Yeah. I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up with horses and dogs and 20/20 vision. My parents gave me a pony when I was 7 and my first horse when I was 12. I went to summer Camp Nakanoa in the mountains of Tennessee. Anybody ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Camp Nakanoa was wonderful. I won medals and trophies and was twice awarded my silver letter, meaning that I had been judged a girl of sterling character by my peers. We had sororities in high school, and I was invited to join one of the most prestigious. I was even elected an officer my senior year. I graduated with honors from the University of the South. But material wealth, awards, and trophies were not enough, because they can never be enough. What I've learned since becoming blind is far more valuable. I've learned to dig deep for the steel and determination that were required to put my life back together after my suicide attempt. which is the cause of my blindness. My story is a story of adapting to change. It's a story of what it takes to put life back together after a traumatic event that upends the world of hopes and expectations. I was 22 when I graduated from college, and I got married 3 weeks later, the June bride thing. That marriage is the first time I can remember being truly unhappy. Marriage 1.0 ended after 2 years. Oh no, this was bad.
No.
This was not supposed to have happened. Next, I tried my hand at being a business professional, but I wasn't any better at that than I had been at marriage. And that ended again after 2 years. With nothing to do and no income, at the age of 26, I moved back in with my parents into the home where I'd grown up. What had happened to that charmed life I was supposed to lead? Life was supposed to be lovely and rosy. Nothing bad was ever supposed to happen. And if something bad did happen, it couldn't be discussed or explored because that would make it real. It was no surprise that I couldn't tell the truth to the psychiatrist that my parents insisted that I see. I tried, I really did, but I just couldn't do it. In the end, he prescribed an antidepressant, and the only effect the medicine seemed to have was to make it impossible to get out of bed in the morning.
I hear you, Sue.
I'd lie there, staring up at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, wondering what on earth it would be worth getting out of bed to do. I had failed at marriage. I had failed in business. And now I was failing to be able to get out of bed. For the previous 2 years, I had been an exercise rider for a federal judge. The judge owned a steel gray thoroughbred named Night Commander.
Oh, wow.
My job was to keep the horse fit and in training for fox hunting. Night Commander had developed the habit of setting his jaw against the bit and rushing out of control at any fence the judge directed him to jump during the hunt. This was dangerous enough in itself, but it was especially dangerous in a crowded hunt field. I didn't see this behavior when I rode Night Commander for exercise, and the judge decided that it must be the excitement of the hunt that was the problem. He invited me to hunt Night Commander the second weekend in November. On the morning I was to go to the hunt, I awakened to that familiar feeling of paralysis. Anybody in this room who has ever been depressed,
Oh, yes. I love you, Sue.
you know what it's like to wake up, see the sun coming up, and say, damn, I've got to live another day. Somehow I got myself together and arrived at the judge's house. I transferred my tack to the trailer and paused to give Night Commander's nose a scratch before closing the trailer door. Then the judge drove us to the meet. As we pulled into the field, I saw the familiar sights. The hunt staff in their scarlet coats. Yeah, they really do wear scarlet coats. Members of the hunt wearing black coats, some with the hunt colors on their collars. As I got out of the car, I heard the familiar sounds. Horses snorted and whinnied. Friends called greetings to each other in the chilly air. There was laughter and fun. All of it familiar. I had been there 100 times, yet all of it utterly alien. I felt alone and isolated. I'll never forget mounting Night Commander that day. He was a big horse, standing 17 hands 1 inch. But I'd been mounting him no problem for 2 years. That day, though, getting myself into the saddle was like climbing a mountain. I struggled and finally dragged myself into the saddle. The judge placed his hand on my boot, looked carefully into my eyes, and said, "Are you going to be okay?" I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just nodded, gathered Knight Commander's reins, and moved off to join the hunt. The huntsman sent the pack to cover to draw for a fox. They shot off in ever-widening circles. Soon, with the hounds in full cry, we were off. We galloped across the first field and approached the first fence. I wasn't sure what I was going to do if Knight Commander tried to rush the fence, but I trusted my instincts. One thing I needed, though, was space. I tightened my hands on the braided reins and slowed down. The other horses, black, bay, chestnut, and white, flashed by, and then it was time. Leaning forward, I tightened my legs and gave Knight Commander some rein. We gathered speed. As we approached the jump, he pinned back his ears, threw his head in the air, and set his jaw against the bit. I stood in the stirrups and, leaning as far forward as I dared, I yanked down hard on the right rein. That got his attention. Back in the saddle, I collected the horse by driving forward with my legs and seat and resisting slightly with my hands. Knight Commander gracefully vaulted the fence. At the next few fences, I followed the same routine of hanging back, but it wasn't necessary. I had cured Knight Commander of rushing his fences. As I approached the meet, I unbuckled my helmet and took it off. The judge came forward and took Knight Commander's reins in his hands. "I did it," I said. And then I dismounted. The instant my feet hit the ground, every shred of accomplishment and pride vanished. In the space of an instant, I was back in my tiny world of despair. What was wrong with me? I should have been elated. I had lived up to the trust the judge had in me. I had ridden brilliantly. But all I felt was hollow. There was no joy, no satisfaction. The days and weeks following the hunt saw little improvement in either my mood or my energy. My mood remained grim and my energy non-existent. The best thing that happened to me all day was going to sleep. The worst thing that happened to me all day was waking up. Yep. Been there, done that. It would be okay, I thought, if I could just go to sleep and not wake up. Yep. Oh my God, Sue. But how could I make that happen? I began to obsess about the shotgun in my brother's closet. But I couldn't use that gun in my father's house. I couldn't bear the thought of putting my family through the ordeal of finding me afterwards. I'd retreat from my suicidal thoughts for a period of time, but they kept coming back. It felt like I was being sucked into a whirlpool. And it was becoming almost too hard to resist. Eventually, I remembered another gun. This one was at the lake house of some family friends. I knew where the key to the house was, and I knew where the gun was. It was a quiet day in December when I pulled into the driveway of the lake house. The key was still in the same place, and so was the gun, a .22 caliber rifle. I took the gun down from the shelf and put some bullets in my pocket. Then I went into the living room and sat down on the sofa. I looked out across the lake, and there was a beautiful weeping willow on a spit of land just there across the lake. Weeping willow, Salix babylonica. I was an English major in college, but I took forestry and botany classes too. And as an English major, I had scoured the reference materials in the library to learn of the place held by the trees that I was learning about in dendrology in legend, myth, and mythology. Weeping Willow. One of its associations is death. There were others, but the death thing was the only one I could remember. How apt, I thought, pulling my thoughts back into the lake house. I looked at the clock. It was 11:30 in the morning. I loaded the gun, positioned it, and hesitated. If I did this, it was going to be final. There would be no going back. I both wanted to do this and not do it. But there was nothing that I could think of, nothing big enough, nothing important enough to get me out of the whirlpool of depression. I closed my eyes, I held my breath, and I pulled the trigger. I lay alone, unconscious, and bleeding for 8 hours. When I regained consciousness, I sat up. I was covered in blood, some of it dry and crusty, and some still wet and sticky. And it was dark. It was completely dark. Thinking the blood may have dried my eyelids closed, I tried to pry them open with my fingers, but still nothing. Putting the question of the darkness aside for the moment, I tried to decide what to do next. What does one do when one is injured? I took the first step towards living again. Getting to my feet, I went into the kitchen. I went in the kitchen and found the phone. Picking it up, I realized I was going to have to dial it by touch because it was still dark, all dark. I must have tried 6 or 7 times, but I just could not punch in my parents' phone number. Finally, I gave up and hung the phone up. I could barely stay on my feet. I had lost so much blood. I was trying to decide what to do next, and the phone rang. When I hadn't come home that night, my parents had called everybody they could think of who might know where I was. One of the people they called was Adam, the man who owns the lake house. It was Adam on the phone. The minute I heard his voice, I wanted to live. I grabbed onto life and held on. I told Adam what I had done, and he took charge. He summoned a neighbor, the police came, and an ambulance came. And then we were headed back to Birmingham. I think it was the 4th or 5th night that I was in the ICU when a family friend strode into the room and said, "Yes, I think I can help you sell Sue's car." I sat bolt upright in bed and said, "What? Why are you going to sell my car?" No one spoke. Slowly I sat back. There it was. This darkness, this absence of light, was going to be my life. I was blind. I think it was Christmas Eve when the judge came to see me in the hospital. Kneeling beside my bed, he took both of my hands in his, and in a voice thick with emotion, he said, "I am so, so sorry." And that did it. For the first time, I broke through the walls I had built up around myself, and I began to cry. Holding the hands of the man who had brought me into his world of horses, witnessing the tears of the man who had so much confidence in my abilities with Knight Commander, I finally began to cry. I wept for the loss of my sight. But the judge and I both knew it was more than the loss of my sight that we wept for. We wept for my lost way of life. Coming home from the hospital is just about the oddest thing I've ever done. I felt reasonably sure that nothing had changed. I felt equally sure that absolutely everything had changed. Every morning, I'd wake up and lie there with my eyes closed, longing, deeply longing that this time, when I opened my eyes, I'd be able to see again. But of course, it never happened. Every morning, I'd listen to cars driving by in front of the house. People were going to work. It gave me a feeling of despair to know that life was going on around me as though nothing had happened. Have some water. Okay. Thanks. I cannot get this through this talk without water. My rehab teacher's name was Vera. The first time she came to see us, or me, as she came into the living room, I stood and held out my hand to shake hers. Nothing happened. I'm sorry, I said, I can't see to shake your hand. And she gaily replied, that's okay, neither can I. It's safe to say that I was the first person who was blind that I ever met. Vera was the second. After some small talk, Vera turned to me and said, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, and that might help me know where to start in teaching you the skills that you need to live your life as a person who's blind. I was stymied. Tell me a little bit of her a little bit about myself. Yeah, in the past when somebody said that, I'd reach out and grab a happy memory from here, there, and yon and use those to tell them a little bit about myself. You know, the kind of thing. The thrill of arriving at the top of a mountain after a long and difficult climb. The feelings of mastery as strapped into my kayak, I kayaked to the toughest whitewater rivers in the southeast. The thrill of speed on a thoroughbred at full gallop. I couldn't use any of those things now. It felt like my whole identity had been stripped away. Finally, sort of desperately, I said, I majored in English. And Vera said, okay. As an English major, you must love literature, so why don't we start with communications and Braille. I've brought some Braille instruction books and we can start now. At the end of an hour and a half, I could read Braille.
Yes.
How cool was that? I could read 3-letter words in Braille. Dad, bad, cab. I felt like I'd really accomplished something. And then I stopped and I said, you're 26 years old. 2 months ago, you were flying over fences mounted on a huge thoroughbred. And you feel like you've accomplished something because you can read a 3-letter word in Braille? Come on. But you know what? I let myself feel the accomplishment. I dove into Braille. I worked on it hours every day. And I worked on everything that Vera taught me with the same enthusiasm. My orientation and mobility instructor's name was Oscar. The first time Oscar came,
my dad's name.
the first time Oscar came to see me, once again, my mother, father, and I waited in the living room for another stranger to ring the bell. Oscar strode into the living room, radiating energy and confidence. He hadn't even opened his mouth and I was intimidated. That night, Oscar taught my mother, my father, and me sighted guide techniques. The next Saturday, he picked me up at 10 o'clock in the morning and we went to a nearby church. When Oscar handed me my first cane, I took it in my hands and I thought, when I learn to use this cane, it's going to be my means of independent mobility. So we began. In a big open room, Oscar showed me how to hold the cane, how to position my hand, the correct arc to swing the cane, and how to stay in step. Who knew there was so much to using the cane? Over and over again, I walked up and down in the big open room. Finally, Oscar took me out in the hallway and said, go for it. And I did. For the first time in weeks, I was walking independently. Concentrating hard on keeping my hands centered, swinging the cane the correct arc, and staying in step, I was drawn up short when wham! The tip of the cane collided with the wall at the end of the hallway. Turning to Oscar, I said, look, it works! It stopped me before I walked slap into this wall. As spring approached, I had a problem. I love the transition from the dormancy of winter to the vibrant lushness that is spring in the South. Yes.
Yeah.
I used to swing up on my horse bareback and go tearing through the woods, scouring the forest floor for the first wildflowers. I love the march of the spring colors across the hillsides. First, the distinctive dark red as the maples bloomed. Then the improbable fuchsia of the red buds with the white of the flowering dogwood thrown in. I'd never see that again. I needed to talk to somebody, and it needed to be somebody who understood about adjustment to blindness. That night, seated in a restaurant at the mall with Oscar, I tried to explain. I'm learning all of these new skills from you and Vera, and it's really great. But it's like my emotions aren't keeping up. I go to do something, and I get drawn up short, forgetting that I have to do it in a different way now that I'm blind. Or I go to do something and get drawn up short because I haven't even learned how to do it yet. I don't know, Oscar. Is this normal? Will it ever get any easier? That night, Oscar told me about Father Thomas Carroll and his concept of adjusting to blindness when you become blind as an adult. Father Carroll believes that in order to move forward into your new life as a person who is blind, you must first let go of your sighted self. It's holding on to all of those notions, ideas, and concepts that hold you back. Once you let go, then you're free to move forward into your new life as someone who's blind. There it was. Just that morning, I had stood in my closet, all pissed off, because I had to flip through my shirts one by one, reading the little braille tags just to find the shirt I wanted to wear. Instead of getting on with it and just doing what needed to be done, I had stood there fuming because I couldn't do it the way I always had done before. There were to be many setbacks in the weeks and months ahead, but that was the beginning of my willingness to look and move forward. The time arrived for the drop-off lesson. Oscar drove around and around and around. As I stepped up onto the curb after he had parked, he said, "Are you lost?" Glaring at him, I said, "Of course I'm lost. We could be in Missouri for all I know." St. Louis. Oscar told me my destination and vanished. I employed all the skills I had learned, and an hour and a half later, I arrived safely at the destination.
Yeah. Good job, Sue. Now.
when Oscar rematerialized at my right shoulder, he gave me a hug and we went to a nearby restaurant for a celebratory lunch. As the 1-year anniversary of my suicide attempt and the beginning of my life with blindness approached, I reflected over the past year. In just 12 months, I had gone from despair to triumph. In those early days, I realized that my self-concept had been that of a damaged version of my sighted self. And the fact that I was blind was the most important part about who I was as a person, at least to me. Gradually, the feelings of being a damaged version of my former self began to ease. And with the skills and attitudes that Vera and Oscar had taught me, I was on my way to being a whole person who happened to be blind. Oscar and Vera had made such a difference in my life that I decided I wanted to offer that to other people. I enrolled in the master's program at Western Michigan University. Woo-hoo! I'll never forget the first day of classes. It was pouring rain. I bundled up and set out, and 20 minutes later squelched down the hall to my first class. I didn't know it at the time, but my future husband, Jim Martin, sat in the same classroom. Jim's first glimpse of me was that of a disheveled, disgruntled, soggy student. The first time Jim and I got together, it was to complete an assignment for a class, The Dynamics of Blindness. It's called something else now, but that's what we called it then. Everybody in the class had to put on a blindfold and do a recreational activity and then write about the experience afterwards. I had to choose an activity that I hadn't done since becoming blind. Tree identification was on the list, so naturally I chose that. The problem was I needed somebody to do it with me, and it needed to be somebody who knew the trees of Southwest Michigan so that my identifications could either be confirmed or denied. I asked around and was encouraged to introduce myself to Jim Martin and ask for his help. We planned to go out in the woods for our tree identification expedition on a Saturday afternoon. That morning I was bebopping along the sidewalk, thinking about getting out in the woods later, when the bottom dropped out of my world. Somebody had left the cover off of a manhole. And I, absent-mindedly, walking along with my hand not centered, and therefore not covering my left side, stepped in. When Jim called to see if I was ready to go out in the woods that afternoon, I was flat on my back with 4 ice packs on my legs. I told Jim my tale of woe, and we thought it was absolutely hysterical. Undeterred by his first glimpse of me being that of a drowned rat, not put off by having to postpone our first date due to my poor cane technique, Jim and I became an item.
Woo!
By the time graduate school drew to a close, we were engaged to be married.
Yay!
How many years, Sue?
I'm getting there. In June, Jim went to the Tennessee Rehab Center to start his job at the same time that I went to the Seeing Eye to train with my first dog. Her name is Sadie. It was Gary Mattoon who spoke those words. And it was Gary who gave me my first dog. The next morning, I picked up the harness handle for the first time. For the first time, I said, "Sadie, forward." and we flew down the sidewalk. I cannot express the wonder of it. Once again, communication passed between human and animal. But instead of passing through the leather of a saddle and bridle, it passed through the leather of a leash and harness. This was wonderful. This was as good as flying over fences mounted on Night Commander. No, it was better than that. It was better than that. That had been sport. This was life. Smiling, I walked into my future. Turning to me, my father said, "Ready?" I nodded, and we walked into the living room with Sadie at heel. It was 2 days after I brought Sadie home from the CNI. Somehow I missed the part about keeping the first 2 weeks home with a new dog quiet. It was our wedding day. As the ceremony drew to a close, the minister asked us to kneel. We knelt on the needle. We knelt on the kneeler that I had chosen especially for the occasion. Needle pointed by my father. It depicted Jesus' first miracle, that of turning water into wine. This was a miracle. Just 2.5 years earlier, I had thought that life was not worth living. And today I was marrying the man I loved and poised to move forward into a new life. As we knelt, I discovered that Sadie had been lying with her chin on the kneeler the entire time. With my right hand in Jim's left and my left hand resting on Sadie's head, the minister blessed our marriage. That was almost 29 years ago. We've loved each other. We've shared joys and sorrows, trials and triumphs. We've made a life together. And into that life, one by one, have come my dogs. Sadie, Quaddy, Beverly, and Kismet. In those early days of blindness, I didn't see how I could go on. Blindness seemed an insurmountable obstacle. But I did go on, sometimes ploddingly, just putting one foot in front of the other. Each step a struggle, yet each step taking me closer to being a whole person. And today, with a man who loves and believes in me, walking beside me, with a dog that I love and believe in, guiding every step of the way, I once again climb mountains. Thank you.